Yeah. In a world where culture and the feminist movement is moving into one more that is politically correct, I feel that it's quite surprising that the feminist movement is extremely exclusionary in this instance. I think in side of opening opposition, what we proved to you today is that the feminist movement isn't necessarily that exclusionary, but on side of opening opposition, we also want to prove to you that we believe in we don't believe in the binary. One that is more inclusive of all women in the community, rather than opening government that forces women to conform to one standard or the other. In my rebuttals, I'll talk about two particular issues. One, is the feminist movement that exclusionary? And second, is women conforming to men's ideals inside of opening government? The first point in rebuttal, is the feminist movement that exclusionary? I think on the very start of the premise, we should like to characterize that the feminist movement has been moving on to a more progressive path. There have been points of intersectionality. Malala Yousafzai is a form of intersectional feminist icon. In those instances, I don't see why the feminist movement can be that extremely exclusionary. Take a seat. But even if, to a certain extent, that the feminist movement is somehow exclusionary, I think that the government's model is one that makes the feminist movement and the ideal of being a true feminist more exclusionary. Why do I say that that is the case? Take a seat. How can you reconcile values of being such as being like maybe extremely feminine, maybe being kind of passive in those instances, and at the same time you still want women to fight to be a leader and fight to be a leader in those positions, having some sort of masculine traits? Take a seat, because to the much of PM's speech, he also said that some women will be coerced into those form of values. So how can you counter hyper-masculinity with hyper-femininity in those instances? Because no, more often, the most hyper-masculine man is men who believe that women should be hyper-feminine. So other than that, you are conforming to the patriarchy on your side. If you still want the feminist movement to support hyper-femininity, at the same time support other parts of the feminist ideals, that's an extremely soft line. Take a seat. I don't see how you can achieve that in those instances. If you can achieve that, it means that the hyper-feminist movement isn't that influential and your model doesn't work to a great extent. The next thing I'd like to talk about is how can women be comfortable as you like? How can women be as comfortable as you want them to be in a hyper-feminine world? Take a seat. We believe inside of opening opposition that there is no one correct position to a scale of gender fluidity. That if you become hyper-masculine, you might be conforming to men's ideas, as they say. But if you become hyper-feminine, you conform to those that are extremely patriarchal, that believe that some women should be hyper-feminine. Rather, you believe that a world or a feminist movement that fights for gender fluidity without one particular gender over the other is a better world, and I'll explain that in my argumentation. Sure.
Okay, so just to be clear, the absence of support under your side has to mean active opposition of women who display these characteristics. Are you going to actively oppose them?
No, we don't oppose like the hyper-feminine women. We support a very fluid form of feminist movement. That is, we allow all form of communities and genders in order to fight for that particular movement. Take a yeah, I'm sorry, you didn't stand up. My first argument. Why you conform to the patriarchy even more? I think the most stereotypical hyper-feminine traits that are in the eyes of most men is that most women that are hyper-feminine should be things such as submissive, passive, or don't necessarily take up leadership positions. The problem is that the patriarchy is built on the superior-inferior complex between men and women, that most hyper-masculine men believe that hyper-feminine women should be childbearers, should be less than them. The harms are twofold. One, that it's harder for the feminist movement to fight for the rights for themselves against the patriarchy. That most women who are in positions of power or positions in power based out of traits of masculinity are ones that don't necessarily get the full support from the side of government. That if women who are in those positions of power that are effectively fighting for women based out of their masculine traits, because you support hyperfemininity and you confirm that this is the ideal type, that means these kind of women are antagonized, these kind of women are isolated from your movement. Second, more often, these are women that are mostly hyperfeminine, are women that are in the privileged side of the spectrum. That is to say, that is POI came out from closing opposition, that more often that if you want to help to fight for this patriarchy, you aren't helping the most minorities of those instances. That maybe those women are based out of masculine traits, those women want to go for protest. In your side, you don't allow them to. Second point of the argument, why is the binary harmful for women? Because what does the support of hyperfemininity mean? Exactly that you support hyperfemininity, that means you identify that there are only certain acts of women that are associated particularly to women. That is specific, that if you are hyperfeminine, that means this can only be accessed by women. What is the harm to this? The first harm is that those who don't conform to the binary or don't conform to hyperfeminine traits are those that are left out from your movement. That is to say that even if men who are supporting of the supporting of the feminist movement, who don't display hyperfeminine traits, can't be accepted within your movement. More often, the construct of identity is based out of the style of the flesh. Therefore, if we normalize that act normalize your behavior within society, that is the kind of narrative that we put upon you. Take a seat. What do I mean by this? What do I mean by this is that when you accept the binary, you create a cultural compulsion for you to be that kind of particular trait. And that is harmful, because the better scale, because gender fluidity in this instance works better as an alternative. That you can put on a makeup and identify as a drag queen, that you can be masculine, you can be feminine, you can be any part of the scale and still be accepted within part of the feminist movement that you are fighting for women's rights. That side does not allow them to do so. What you create is you create more opposition towards your movement. People who initially supported your movement but can't be as hyperfeminine as you want them to be is more likely to be in opposition or create more splinter groups on that side. I think the last thing that we talk about is that our world will become better because there is no societal pressure for you to be hyper-feminine in this instance. You can't argue that you want both ends of the spectrum, that you want hyper-femininity and you also want other form of traits for women. If you support those kind of displays, that will become the main priority, that will become the most influential form of trait. That is to say that you create a lot of pressure for women or for people who support the feminist movement to be as hyper-feminine as you want them to be.
Yeah. Thank you.
It is easy for opening government to live in a utopian world where somehow their feminist group can simultaneously support displays of hyperfemininity, which includes submission, which include reluctance to take up leadership position, which includes reluctance to stand up to men, yet at the same time, support women who actively go against those patriarchal structures, support women who stand up and say that no, our role is not in the household, our role is out there in the workforce, our role is out there to stand toe-to-toe against men. We have never heard any form of explanation from opening government as to how they are going to reconcile those contrasting identities and how are they going to fight for both sides. Especially after leader of opposition told you that if it is possible, they can fight for both sides. That means that your rhetoric and your tone in supporting both factions has to be toned down in order to not antagonize the other sides, which means that your benefits will also be not materialized to the maximum extent. Have a seat, which means that this debate is not a one takes all or one takes nothing debate. This debate is a prioritization debate. Should we prioritize women who have to be masculine, have to fight for their rights, or prioritize women who can't afford to be hyper-feminine and can't afford to live a world where they live in those kinds of identities? Clarification on our stance, because apparently they're trying to say that, well, we are going to demonize this woman, we're not going to stand up for them whatsoever. We think there's a delineation between fighting an identity and fighting women. So the parallel is this. We do not support abusive relationships in general, but we would not go out and demonize women who are in abusive relationships, because we recognize more often than not, these women are placed in the situations where they cannot control whether they are in some form of identity. More often than not, they are coerced into this situation. So we can fight the identity, but still provide support for your women. We're not going to go out and say that you are not worthy of support. We're not going to totally abandon them. We are abandoning the ideology that hyperfemininity is something that the feminist movement should support. Have a seat. My speech will be simple. I'll deal with the case of opening government by answering two issues. Number one, in which world do we help women better? And secondly, in which world is the feminist movement stronger? First issue, in which world do we help women better? And we recognize there are two types of women, the women who are coerced into hyperfemininity and the women who are voluntarily up into hyperfemininity. Let's talk about the women who are coerced. They say that the comparative in opening government's world is that they provide support to this woman. But what does that support look like? Because they cannot simply assert that supporting these women will be a good thing. Because notice that the support in opening government's world isn't women, it's the displays of hyperfemininity. It's the displays that they should be reluctant to stand up to men, the displays that they should be submissive, the displays that they shouldn't go into the streets and protest. What does this support mean? This support means that you won't help this woman escape the shackles of hyperfemininity. You aren't going to teach this woman that you shouldn't teach your children to be hyperfeminine. Have a seat where you literally are teaching them that hyperfemininity is something that is okay and something that you support. You cannot reconcile actually wanting this woman to escape your coercion at the same time teaching them that they shouldn't teach their children to be hyperfeminine. I think you have a seat. I think you further entrench the notion that hyperfemininity is something that is okay, and you make it harder for this woman to escape your form of coercion if that's something that you want to take on. Have a seat. But secondly, on the women who adopt these hyperfeminine traits out of their own free will, we think it is very clear and accepted on both sides of the house that these women are more often than not the privileged. The women who can take classes to be ladylike, the women who can go for social etiquette classes. These women are the women who are least likely to feel the brunt of the patriarchy, and the least likely are the women who are least likely that we need to help in a world of opening opposition. Therefore, when it comes to a prioritization debate, we should help the women who are there in the who are the poor, who has to go out on the streets and picket and fight for their rights and cannot afford to adopt those hyperfeminine traits. Those are the women we prioritize. The conclusion to this issue is, I'll take you a while, the conclusion to this issue is, in a world where we have to pick and choose because we cannot reconcile both these contrasting personalities, we will pick the woman that needs our help more. We will go and oppose hyperfeminine traits. Before I move on to the second issue, closing.
Do you think feminism should not support hijab?
We think there's a nuance here, right? So in a world where individuals are coerced into adopting the hijab, then sure, we will oppose the hijab because it's a form of cultural oppression. Because notice that it's very hard to reconcile this own free choice and individuals who are coerced into adopting certain cultural norms. So if you can establish that more often than not, these women are individuals who are coerced into wearing hijab, then sure, we will oppose wearing the hijab. Second issue, in which world do we have a better feminist movement? And this deals with the argument about hypermasculinity coming out from opening government. Because notice they never came back from the rebuttal that Ben gave you about how more often than not, hypermasculine men are the ones who expect women to be hyper-feminine. It's therefore, if your goal is to counter and the rhetoric of hypermasculinity, you are doing so by reinforcing the notion of what women should be. I do not understand how are you going to fight the objectification of hyper-feminine women when you literally say that displays of hyper-femininity is something that should be accepted and something that should be normalized. You're not fighting the objectification when you're trying to normalize it. That simply doesn't go together. But secondly, on this idea of supporting the extreme ends, making space in the middle, that doesn't make sense at all. If you're going to support hyper-masculine men and you're going to support hyper-feminine women, you sort of create an impression that this is what the binary looks like. This is what people in society should behave like. How do you create space in the middle when you're literally saying that hyper-feminine and hyper-masculine traits are the things that you support? You destroy the space in the middle, and compared to the world of open opposition where we create fluidity and we allow individuals to identify across the spectrum, we think we do it better. And lastly, on the idea of the figurehead of the movement, your conservative hyper-feminine women are terrible figureheads for the movement. Because what will these women advocate? They'll advocate for ladylike manners, they'll advocate for submission. These are not the figureheads that we need in the feminist movement. Considering that they never came back from an analysis about the women we're trying to help, a woman who can't afford to be hyper-feminine. Therefore, we are more than happy to let go of these figureheads, because these figureheads will dilute the message of our feminine movement. They'll take out the space for more masculine women who are better figureheads and represent the interests of the feminist fight better. It is about time we choose who to protect, and the feminist movement should choose those who are most vulnerable.
Thank you for the attention. We're closing off with the event of
Does anyone have water I can have some of?
Yeah, but I'm a bit sick.
Yeah. Thank you. For years, the feminist movement has been telling me, as a result of centuries of religious coercion and cultural coercion, what I'm wearing on my head is invalid. And because it creates pressure on certain sectors of society, it is an invalid choice that I have. Now, OO would like to make a delineation that I will support your personality, but everything that is on you, the makeup that you wear, the feminine clothes that you wear, the hijab that you wear, creates pressures on certain sections of society, and therefore I will invalidate everything that makes you the person you are, but in a way I kind of support you because, you know, I can make that delineation. We think what you do with your body, the way you display yourself, is a characteristic of who you are. And if you as a feminist movement actively say that the way you portray yourself and display yourself is wrong, there is no way in hell you can claim that you can support who you are, but you know, we're kind of like against the structural reasons that make you who you are, right? We think OO lost when they shot themselves in the foot that way. What will I talk about in my speech? Number one, what should the feminist movement support, and what do they, what are the responsibilities to all kinds of women, especially hyper-feminine women? And secondly, whether this is a legitimate choice and whether this is a legitimate choice to be feminist, and whether feminist movement should respect that. Rebuttals will be integrated. So yeah, first of all, what should a feminist movement support? I think OG did a good job of telling you guys that feminist movement has to be inclusive to all kinds of women, including hyper-feminist women. And this should be respected regardless of the pressures that lead to that person being that way. So I think there hasn't been a discussion of what this support looks like. I think support essentially doesn't have to be, we support you regardless of what you do and how you display yourself. We think oftentimes support can look like when you include them within the feminist movement, you also have the ability to call them into your platform, to call them into your forums and have them speak up what it means to be hyper-feminist, or what are the reasons that led them to display themselves that way. Those are the kind of platforms and forums and conversations that can only happen when you're not actively saying, you know what, the way you display yourself is wrong. The way you display yourself coerces other women, and you think you should stop coming on TV, stop wearing the clothes you're wearing. We think the kind of platforms that can lead to weeding out of coercive pressures can only exist when the feminist movement says, look, we understand that this is what makes you you, and this is how you choose to display yourself, and therefore we want you to come to our platforms and talk about it. We think that evolution and weeding out of coercive pressures can only exist in a world where you include them within the feminist movement and not say, you know what, we do not want anything to do with you. We don't think OO has given us any link as to how the absence of this support will automatically lead to a world where everyone can do whatever the hell they want. This leads me nicely to my second extension, right? What is the alternate world, and how the alternative world is going to look like? OO wants you to believe that in a world where feminism doesn't support displays of hyperfemininity, then everyone is going to be able to display themselves in whatever way they want. That's not how it works. When there's an absence of support or opposition or support from feminist movements, people are still going to fall back on the default notions that they have. What are the default notions that exist? It says that to be successful, you need to be a man and therefore incorporate a lot of features that are masculine. This means you have to strive to become as masculine as possible to be successful. And if you are hypersensitive, you don't deserve that promotion, right? You don't deserve to be taken seriously because you are wearing a lot of makeup. We think those women do not have support structure like OO would like you to believe. Women who are called stupid blondes and bimbos and jokes are thrown at them when they enter the office because they're wearing makeup and highlighted their hair are not taken seriously. And the feminist movement promised to provide them that safe space that they needed. We think that's the exclusive benefit that we can provide under our side, because when they go out there and they choose to display the features that they are choosing on their own, they are not taken seriously. And the point of the feminist movement was to ensure that women, regardless of the way they choose to present themselves, must be taken seriously and deserve the rights that you deserve. What you are doing under your side, you are confirming the biases of all masculine women that, look, even your feminist movement doesn't agree with the way you're dressing up. You are essentially commodifying your own body, and these are invalid choices that you're making. In a world where the feminist movement says, look, it is valid for a woman to choose to display herself this way, and men have no control of the way she chooses to show her body, that's when these people can take control of the societal pressures that previously existed. We think those kind of changes can only occur in a world where the feminist movement is actively including them. A second clarification that I'd also like to make, which is something that's kind of been asserted largely on upside, is only rich women and privileged women are hyper-feminine. Look, the ability to buy drugstore makeup, wear skirts, wear high heels, be shy are innate things or things that women of all classes can choose to do. I do not see how that relates to class at all. We're not living in British Victorian society where to be hyper-feminine, you have to go to tea drinking lessons like OO would like you to believe. The ability to display yourself is classless, and even middle-class women and poor women can choose to display themselves that way, and it's perfectly valid. They automatically assume not defending hyper-femininity automatically means including middle-class women and poor women without any link. Before I move on, yes.
Displays of hyperfemininity more often than not include submission and passiveness to male aggression. How do you want your women to fight for your promotion when you support them being submissive?
Not really. There are some women who don't feel the need to shout in the office to be able to be taken too seriously. They have a quiet demeanor. They like to that's the way they are personality-wise. We think, and feminist movement shouldn't create standards as to what makes a feminine or not. And secondly, I told you, even if there are coercive natures that make them this way, the ability to come within forums and platforms that feminist movements provide them can only exist when you include them. Secondly, is it a legitimate choice? We think yes, the existence of pressures doesn't invalidate a lifestyle or the characteristic of a personality, even if it is a result of pressures of the patriarchy. Like being poor and kind of coerced doesn't invalidate your ability to be religious, and being, for example, being a Muslim woman doesn't invalidate the fact that you can choose to be happy by wearing the hijab. We think these are the kind of women that deserve our support. Just because the structures that led to that choice are pressureful doesn't mean that the choice is an invalid choice. And it's wrong to draw a delineation of just because it pressures other women, you should stop doing what you're doing. At what point is Op willing to draw the line of things that pressures other people and therefore we should stop supporting them that way? In a world where, number one, if women actively choose to be hyper-feminine, feminism has a responsibility to include a safe space for them. Secondly, even if it's coercive, we think it's only through our inclusion that we can weed out factors of coercion, something that opposition has not proven yet.
Thank you, Member.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be very clear that please do not buy into this sneaky reshaping of the debate that came in closing government. It is not the burden of the opposition bench to actively condemn individuals for being hyper-feminine. That is not the motion. The motion requires us to assess whether the feminist movement should spend its very limited political capital investing itself into a narrative that reinforces an already existing validated norm of women needing to be hyperfeminine, or should remain agnostic in regards to being hyperfeminine and focus its limited political capital in regards to making it more accessible towards individuals that cannot achieve that particular standard, ladies and gentlemen. If we do that, ladies and gentlemen, then what you reach is an equilibrium where the rest of society has already revalidated this hyperfemininity, and we support individuals that don't currently enjoy support reaching the equilibrium under our side of the house. You need to tell us, why is it that reinforcing something that is continuously already validated under the status quo and placing that standard on women, ladies and gentlemen, is going to help women find any sort of freedom, as opening opposition rightfully point out, break out of those chains in the first place. So notice that a lot of the material that came from Sarah's speech requires us to actively condemn and exclude people, when the people that actively exclude individuals that can't achieve hyperfemininity is under your side of the house. That's a clarification that was necessary. But secondly, what's an important thing that we'll provide in closing opposition is we're going to prove to you structurally why individuals find it incredibly inaccessible to access hyperfemininity. We feel that opening opposition asserts this by stating trans women and stating some people that might not be able to achieve it. And then Sarah comes in here and says that, no, actually, women and middle class people can achieve it. Why is it structurally inaccessible? Firstly, women of color face structural inability to access structures of hyperfemininity. For example, ladies and gentlemen, black women as well as women of color face consistent structural racist tropes of having larger frames of bodies, wider shoulders, that fundamentally go against the traditional forms of femininity and masculine masculine features. An example of this is, for example, all the racist tropes of Michelle Obama throughout the 8 years of Obama's presidency, when she was called a gorilla, when she was called a man, because she had larger hands, because she had wider shoulders, ladies and gentlemen, that don't come across the same way as, for example, dainty Asian women, or the stereotype of really feminine, traditional white women, for example. Secondly, trans women, incredibly inaccessible for a reason of, when you have hyperfemininity as the benchmark, ladies and gentlemen, that means that trans women have to go through plastic surgery and more invasive procedures to quote-unquote pass for a woman, ladies and gentlemen. That means they're having more streamlined jaws, for example, double eyelid surgery, breast implants, ladies and gentlemen. All these things in order to look more feminine and to reach the hyper-feminine standards that are placed on the government side of the house. That is incredibly inaccessible for the most underprivileged women that can't afford to access those standards. Or, for example, women in general. Yes, Sarah,
Sarah, a lot of people can't afford Sephora's $100, $200 makeup set in this particular scenario. Large amounts of women can't access the clothes that the media propagates as being the definition of what it means to be feminine, for example. Can't buy a perfume that tells them that smelling like flowers is feminine because it comes from Balenciaga or Dior, for example. All these things are exceptionally inaccessible to the vast majority of people, not to mention the fact that all these things are advertised by the most feminine, by the most privileged of women in society. You need to actually prove to us structurally why the vast majority of women can access that form of beauty, as opposed to just asserting it in Sarah's speech that apparently a lot of people can provide that kind of access. That means it is true that we need to make a trade-off. Why is it true, ladies and gentlemen? Because they told us that these rich women, these privileged women in opening as well, can provide that kind of narrative as well. We're going to provide you structurally and closing opposition. Why? A, you're not going to represent the same thing, but number two, you can't operate in the same space. Because Sarah told you, you bring them in, and then you can moderate them, talk to them, and tell them things, apparently you can change their mind. Why is it true? Because first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, in order for you to change their minds and control the narrative, you must have the political leverage as well as resources in order to counterbalance their strength within the movement. It is the same way how white feminists control the feminist movement, ladies and gentlemen, because women of color and trans women do not have the political capital, resources, or cultural backing in order to overweigh their cultural significance in that movement. So what ends up happening is they become the face of the movement. What's happening is that their voices are louder in the movement. They dominate and define the movement with their concerns and ignore the rest in that particular circumstance. So you can't control their narrative. You can't moderate them because they end up defining the movement for you and excluding you. And the reason why you aren't able to moderate them is because these women of color, these trans women, these disadvantaged women end up leaving the movement at the same time because they feel they can't identify the white space, they can't identify the hyper-feminine beautiful women in the face of feminism. You can't moderate them because they have all things that they disengage when I that's why it is actually instructions as to why the active things that people that you would have seen so I all the the reason is because I just told you that the support of hyperfeminity is structurally exclusionary to everything else. If you support everything, ladies and gentlemen, it has to be functional within the context. If the status quo status is that you already have an extreme validation of beauty standards and hyperfeminity in the media, culturally speaking, women have to wear short skirts, are hypersexualized. If this is status quo, revalidating that means having less airtime for the rest, and that means that excluding all the rest of the narratives. You have to prove to us why you could do all those things. But fundamentally, ladies and gentlemen, the second area of extension is incredibly important because this comes to the professional part. They keep on asserting to us that apparently making people hyper-feminine makes things easier, as if men will suddenly now change their minds about women the moment that you validate being hyper-feminine, ladies and gentlemen. This doesn't happen when you increase the mental barrier for men to accept that hyper-femininity is okay. For men to believe that femininity is okay, they need to believe that putting on concealer is okay. Things like acting in a feminine way is okay. Describing it in the most extreme extent alienates men, ladies and gentlemen. It makes them feel like they have to be called a girl. They have to be called feminine. They have to face all the social pressures in order for them to accept being called feminine, ladies and gentlemen. That makes them not okay with supporting the feminist movement, or not okay with being feminine, and less likely to be feminists under their side of the house. And that is why structurally you get less support from both women, men, especially the women that matter. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
closing opposition's case was a little odd, right? They don't exactly want to oppose it in its entirety, but at the same time, they're not going to support it as well, right? I think the idea here is that there's an obvious inconsistency present. This debate wants you to like take a stance, right? This is obviously like you choose to actively support something or you don't, right? It's that simple. We're not the sneaky ones in this debate. I think they are. So I'm going to prove to you two things. Right, firstly, I'm going to tell you exactly which side better achieves the feminist goal. Second, I'm going to tell you exactly which side better controls societal narratives and why it's important to have these feminine women inside to do so. Right. So a few things. One, the first issue. They stated that this is a debate about prioritizing one narrative over the other. Right. This was opening's argument. So a few things you have to understand. Right. One, I think this debate is very obvious in what kind of stances you should take. This is a debate in which, look, you either support it or you don't. Right. So if you support it, which means this isn't a debate. By the way, just to clarify, this isn't a debate where we monopolize an opinion, right? This is a debate in which, like every other opinion, we support it, right? For example, we support masculine women in feminism. We also support highly feminine women in feminism, right? Their burden here has to prove that there's objective harms that come as a result of having these women portray themselves within these movements, right? Sit down. So long as we can prove to you that objective harms don't exist, we can definitely win this debate, right? And I think Sarah asked a very important POI opening in this debate, right? Like, it's so obvious. Would you ban the hijab and things like that because they're also a result of coercion, right? The answer coming here was a little odd. They said that yes, anything as a result of coercion we would ban in its entirety, right? Firstly, we have already proven to you how, to an extent, this is definitely a legitimate choice, right? If this individual chooses to opt into it, doesn't mean that just because other people are being coerced into it, this woman cannot choose to define themselves in feminism that way, right? Sit down. Because we gave you a very important and nuanced definition of feminism, right? It's not to prioritize a narrative of women, it's to ensure that you're very accepting to all kinds of women, right? It's to ensure that women from all walks of life are ensured a platform of safe space, a platform to raise their opinions and things like that, right? So what is the alternative that happens under their world? Under their world, right, at the point in which these women are not included, there'll be a dominance of the kinds of women that can opt into feminism. Sit down, right? Something that my partner told you I'll impact. So the situation that you have in this instance is where only, like, for example, women who are CEOs can join feminism, right? Women who are actively voicing out against men, things like that, can join feminism, right? These women who are vulnerable can no longer join feminism, right? Women who are, like, for example, like actively subjugated to like really bad rule or things like that cannot, right? Because usually these women come from the areas that are hyper feminine and things like that, right? The point in which you allow a narrative to dominate a feminism, the feminist cause is heavily undermined because you don't achieve the kinds of goals with regards to equality and things like that, right? But secondly, sit down. An important extension coming from our side was safe spaces, right? Women need to join a particular movement, not just to fight for a cause or to protest, right? But just to feel safe, to be able to self-actualize, to understand that there's other women who've been through what you've been through and have made it out okay, right? When you opt into these things and you see other feminine women in these movements, but you see them doing like really good things now, this is a really important empowering factor, right? We know that there are feminine women out there. No, they're not just going to die out, right? Women are just not going to say like, oh, I don't want to be feminine anymore just because feminism isn't accepting me, right? These women need a place to join. So you're literally taking this platform away from them to be able to self-actualize in an environment where other people are just like them, right? Yeah.
So opening tells you that these women are privileged and would represent the movement. We told you that it will exclude trans women and women of color and dominate the movement, as well as the standards are very hard to achieve. Why are all these things not enough to deal with your circumstance when these women won't deal with the movement anyway?
Okay, several things in that POI, right? One, the last thing he talked about standards. We think that your side is the one that is actively creating standards within feminism, right? Because you're saying that it's just few kinds of women who can join, right? That feminism isn't about being girly and things like that, right? Those are objective standards that exist on your side. But secondly, right, when you want to talk about things like, for example, I'll deal with the whole like African American thing later, right? We'll tell you why on our side the spectrum increases. But then like a few things, right? We think that these women exist from like a plethora of different societal backgrounds, right? Like these women can be rich, these women can be poor, right? It's not to say that they're only underprivileged individuals. That was very clear in our stance, and I'll impact this further in my argument, right? But the second issue, the important one, sit down. Which side better controls societal narratives, right? Now, this was Mifzel's interesting extension. He said that certain standards will allow to dominate, right? For example, like women who can't access expensive makeups and things like that will no longer be seen as dominant. Women who are biologically like more bigger bone and things like that will be excluded. Firstly, right? Sit down. We know that these forms of narratives exist within societies, right? That tell women constantly that you're not feminine enough and things like that. we need a way to extend this definition to reach multiple women, right? And we think that feminism is the best way for you to do that. How? Because when these women like have an environment where other women also want to actively call themselves feminine, that's an important thing to do. What does this necessarily entail? For example, women like Serena Williams have significant platform on television, right? And if they join feminism and they raise other the opinions of other African American women on television, right? On like TVs and magazines and things like that, to say that, look, beauty can also be if you're big bone, right? Beauty can also be like if you want to, for example, opt for poor makeup or no makeup at all, right? These are standards that we can change on our side, but this can only happen when these women are allowed to like opt into feminism, right? Regardless of like where they come from and things like that. Because they can only, these narratives can only be changed when women from all walks of life join feminism. And we think that feminism is the most, like, it's literally the most powerful weapon to extend these narratives. In your world, right, the comparative is this, that these women, people would still want to feel feminine, right? But they don't have a way to extend the definition to reach them. So which this necessarily entails that like African American women or trans women literally have no alternative in your side to change societal narratives that I too can be a feminine woman. At least on our side, when we allow them the option of feminism, we allow them the option of opting into a movement where other women also want to actively call themselves feminine, we get to extend the definition to reach everyone, given the kind of platform that some of these women have, right? That is a unique benefit that only exists if you allow feminism to actively advertise like femininity and say like it's necessarily a good thing in some aspects, right? This is literally this is a benefit that you can only get in a world in which feminism supports this form of portrayal, right? So women from all walks of life can opt into this and extend the definition to reach them. And at a point in which you don't have this, we know that they're literally the benefit that they're trying to say that these societal narratives will die out is contingent upon the assumption that no one will want to be feminine, right? People will still want to be feminine. At least under our world, we give them a platform to extend the definitions to themselves, right? And that is a unique benefit that can only come as a result of you choosing to join the feminist movement, right? We've proven to you several things. We've proven to you, one, what kind of the standards you create are more exclusionary and won't allow certain vulnerable women to join. We've told you exactly the best way of extending certain definitions to meet like all people from all walks of life, right? For all those reasons, proud to propose.
Mr. Speaker, I think enforcing hyperfemininity stereotypes, you confirm the stereotypes of women and you alienate the men, right? I think that is what the direction of the debate should have been, right? I think from side closing opposition, we think it's extremely harmful what this narrative that side government really wanted to bring into the status quo, right? So I think there are few issues that I will touch on in this debate. First, about the idea of inclusivity. Second, on how it's harder for men to then conform or support feminist movement from their side of the house, right? So now let's look at the side closing government's case, right? So what did side closing government really bring into this debate today, right? So they wanted to talk about how they're pushing us to pick a side, right? They're enforcing a burden on us to then pick a side, or to the extreme, to pick a side whether we want to support hyperfemininity or we don't want to support hyperfemininity, right? So they're painting a picture of how we have to condemn hyperfemininity, right? No, thank you. So why do you think this is not true, right? So what did Irza talk to you about, right? So the only thing he wanted to talk about was how they're going to change the narrative of the people on the ground, right? So how they're going to say a big boned, broad-shouldered women are able to be included, right? Now, but notice that in order for you to change the narrative, one, you have to be able to change change or control the most privileged women of that movement itself, right? So if what Miff told you was true, that one, higher standards are harder to achieve. Second, hyperfeminists dominate the movement. Three, when this happens, it means that other people who are disenfranchised or aren't able to conform to one side will then leave, and no response to that, we tell you that we don't think this is true, right? You won't be able to change the narrative when you don't have the support in the first place, right? So let's look into what the main issue, right? Inclusivity, right? I think both sides argue well, sure. They want to talk about how you then include the trans women, black women, and also they want to talk about how you then champion these people, right? You empower the women who are hyper-feminists, right, for example. Now, why we think this is not true, right? And why we think this is bad? Because notice that you empower those who are hyper-feminists, but note that hyper-feminists are usually those who are most privileged, those who are able to conform to the standards that side government really wanted to pay, which means that they're probably blondes, blue-eyed girl, right, who are able to afford this makeup, right? But why is this hard, or things like this are their lives likely to be feminists, right? Now, why is this so? One, because they don't experience the same struggles as those or the feminist movement are really fighting for, right? So which means that how do you break the deadlock in this, right? So on-site government, on-site opposition, we're willing to take the trade-off that sure, we're going to lose the most privileged of the privileged, right? We're going to lose the hyper-feminists, but so what? The feminist movement are catering to the most disenfranchised, the ones who are able to gain support, who don't have the political strength. What you're doing on your side of the house is just empowering those who already have strength in the status quo, right? Why we think this is not good. Why? So on our side, we tell you that who do you lose on your side, right? One, no thank you. You lose women of color, right? Second, you lose trans women. Third, you lose women who in general won't be able to conform to the standards, won't be able to achieve to the standards that you want to impose on them. No thank you. Now, why is it that we lose them in the first place, right? Because notice that to be able to be a hyper-feminist, you have to be one, sexual enough. Second, you also have to be a small petite frame woman, right? Who probably wear makeup and stuff like that. So how do you exclude the trans women, right? You exclude them because they are impossible to conform to this sort of things. These standards are impossibly hard to achieve, right? Because one, they probably have to take hormone shots, for example, right? Probably have to have breast implants. Second, they probably have to have softer voice, which is impossible for trans women, right? Now, why we think it's harmful on that side of the house, right? No, thank you. Now, let's look at how it's harder for men to then, well, it's harder for men to then support the feminist movement at the end of the day, right? Because let's look at how, yeah, sure.
If the hyper-feminine narrative is truly the most popular one, how will the feminist movement gain any capital at all by supporting everything else except the hyper-feminine narrative and to be able to make the changes through these submissive structures?
So notice that we've told you from our side of the house, for you to be able to change a narrative, you have to be able to control the most privileged women. And this is highly impossible, right? So I think on our side of the house, for us to be able to change a narrative, we then empower the most disenfranchised, we empower the people who are supposed to be getting the support. Instead of hyper-feminists who, one, have enough political power, second, are already who has it going on for them, right? Who don't have the same fight. Because notice that those are hyper-feminists are privileged, which means that they are unable to then relate to the struggles that the most disenfranchised have to go through, and these are the people that we want to cater and help, right? So now let's look at the idea of how it's harder for men to then help in this movement, right? Now, why is it so, right? Because it means that you disempower manly women and also men, right? Because Mifsal told you, right? There'll be less support for both sides, right? Men and women, because now you condemn the men for supporting this movement. Now you call them gay for wearing pink, right? You call them feminine for wearing that, for probably dressing up or getting manicure or pedicure, right? Now, this is why it's extremely harmful, because we need all the support possible to then change the narrative of this most hyper-feminist, right? i.e. the most privileged women, right? We think that we need all the support possible from both men and women. So gender is fluid, right? We don't think we should conform to just one side, right? We think it's extremely harmful for your side of the house to then confirm the narrative that women should be feminine, that women have to sleep with their bosses, to then rank up and go up, to have some, to be able to achieve a higher level in companies, right? On side opposition, we think it's extremely harmful for you to have the narrative, and we're extremely proud to oppose. Thank you.